Welcome, everyone, to the Teaching and Learning meeting. We have a full agenda today. We will be talking about kindergarten readiness, English learner update, pipelines of teachers and principals, procurement. So we have a lot going on. And are you ready with the kindergarten readiness? Is that where we're starting? Okay, thank you so much. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm Christopher Wan, the Director of Research in the Office of Achievement and Accountability.
Hi, I'm Crystal Francis. I'm the Director of Early Learning Programs.
So it's great to be able to go first, get this started with kindergarten. So we're here today to get the presentation up.
Oh, there it goes. It's coming. There we go. Okay.
All right, so we're here today to talk about our kindergarten readiness assessment and present the results from this school year, 2018-19. So a little bit of background before we get started and just to explain how the presentation is going to work. I'm going to go through some of the assessment data and the results, and then Crystal is going to address some of the initiatives and things that the early learning department is working on in conjunction with our KRA results. So the KRA, or Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, is a component of Maryland's Ready for Kindergarten Early Childhood Comprehensive Assessment System. It's one of two tests in that assessment system, the other being the Early Learning.
Would you just repeat your name for us one time, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Christopher Wan. It's W-O-H-N.
Thank you.
Sure. So the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, along with the Early Learning Assessment, are the two components of the Early Childhood Comprehensive Assessment System in the state of Maryland. I like to think it's very different than a lot of other assessments we look at, like PARCC and some of our more achievement-based ones, because it's telling us who we're getting into our school system, how are our kindergartners entering their K through 12 experience in Baltimore City, and not so much judging the progress that they've made in a class and learning specific things. So it's a little different than PARCC and a lot of our other assessments. We first gave the test in the 14-15 school year. And the test window has been about at the same time every year. It takes place right at the beginning of the year. So we're getting those students just right as they enter kindergarten and haven't had a chance to get too much instruction to influence those test results in their kindergarten class. There's been some significant changes to scoring that have happened over the years. And one of those significant changes in addition was the way the test was administered. In 16-17, the state made a decision to allow districts to administer the KRA to either all of their kindergarten students, called a census administration, or they could do a representative sampling of a smaller population of students. We selected to do the census administration, and the idea there was by getting these assessments results, we would be able to provide more information to our kindergartner teachers about how their students were doing and to really use it as a needs assessment for their incoming students. So I wanted to just point out that the KRA is somewhat of a different assessment. Taken early in the year, it's assessing kindergarten students' readiness for kindergarten, not their performance in kindergarten. So a lot of times that can be confusing for folks. So if we present, say, school level results about school 113 and they had 100% of their kids ready, it might be tempted to say, well, great job, school 113, but that is not exactly how the test works. It's really representing how ready students are when they came into the kindergarten program. That being said, it serves as a needs assessment for kindergarten teachers and their incoming students, and it allows for comparisons and analysis of prior care settings, and those are sort of our early childhood education settings. Some of those examples of those are on the right. So a summary of our results for this year: City Schools kindergarten readiness rate fell by 2 points from the previous year, down from 41 to 39% readiness. That was partly, or about half, due to a change in scoring methodology. Readiness gaps exist by race and ethnicity, economic disadvantage, English learner, and students with disability status. So that's important in this case because we're really seeing that those gaps exist when students pretty much enter our school system. Students who attended City Schools pre-kindergartner programs with Judy centers demonstrated higher rates of readiness than students across public pre-K programs in the state, and we'll go into all these in more detail. So how does the KRA measure kindergarten readiness? Well, the KRA evaluates sort of 4 domains of student readiness: language and literacy, math, social foundations, and physical development. Those 4 domains, students receive scores in each of them, and they can be averaged or totaled across the 4 domains to generate a composite score. That composite score is then used to assign one of 3 performance level descriptors or readiness levels to a student, and they can be demonstrating, which is the highest level of readiness, approaching, or emerging with the lowest level. One change from previous years is that we used to report readiness for each of the 4 domains. So a student could be ready overall, but they would also be ready or not ready in language, math, and each of these 4 things. That's changed this year. They're no longer reporting readiness at the domain level. Students only get that readiness level at the overall or composite level. So some of our data might look different than it's been presented in previous years because we're not able to say % ready on language, literacy, math, and the other 4 domains.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? Why
Sure.
that change? How did that change happen? Is that the test?
Yes, they changed the test scoring methodology. So we still receive scores, so you can get some sense of our performance in those categories, but they didn't make a label statement of like this constitutes that you're ready in math or ready in language. But we still are able to get a look at some of the performance in those domains. You go back to the previous one. Another change we wanted to highlight is that for the first time, all of our students received composite scores, even if limitations related to a student's special ed or English learner status or medical conditions prevented the student from participating. So this test is taken in close, with a teacher right there administering the test to it. If a student isn't able to finish a question or answer a question in the past, if that was due to the student's disability or a language barrier, they would mark the answer as not scoreable. This year changed it so that now those things that used to be considered not scoreable because of a disability or a student wasn't able to answer the question are now being marked as 0. So the net effect of that, and this has been discussed at the state, is that for city schools, that change in our scoring methodology accounted for about half of our 2-point decrease, or about 1 percentage point decrease was due to the change in scoring.
And that, again, I'm sorry, I'm slow. That was a decision by the test maker or the?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so our results are shown here alongside with the state for comparison. So the state's readiness percentage was 47% versus our 39, so that's an 8-point gap. Go on to the next one. And we've done here is we've shown that over the past several years. And we've also broken out or shown our pre-kindergarten programs as alongside a comparison with Maryland State pre-kindergarten programs. What we're seeing here is, again, we're at 39% overall. The state is at 47%. Our pre-K programs are actually achieving readiness of students that come out of those at a rate of 45%, which is much closer to the state overall and actually tied with other pre-kindergarten programs in the state of Maryland, both at 45%. Sure.
I hate to keep stopping. Now, this is all pre-K, or is this where you've broken out those who were at the pre-Ks with the Judy Center?
So in our attended BCPS pre-K, that's going to include both non-Judy Center
Right.
and Judy Center. You're foreshadowing a little bit because we're going to
Okay,
come
no,
back
just-
to the Judy Centers later on in the presentation.
Okay, no
but
problem.
Right
Just
here,
wanted to
yeah.
make sure. I'd seen it later, but I want to make sure with this one, it was any pre-K program that we offer for the city.
Yeah, we wanted to try and make sort of an apples-to-apples comparison with the pre-K programs in the state, so that's why we chose that to do on this side. Mm-hmm. Here we have readiness levels broken out by race and ethnicity. And we see that our white students had an increase in performance of about at 2%. Our African American students went down about 2%, and our Hispanic students went down about 6% from the previous year. So what that has contributed to is a widening in the gap between our white students and their African American and Hispanic classmates. I think it's worth pointing out that The test is only administered in English, so there's not really support for Spanish speakers. The rates of students who are English learners among our Hispanic subgroup is very high in pre-K. About 71% of our pre-K Hispanic students are also classified as EL. And we see that shrink as we go up in grade. So by the time they get to third grade, it's only about 60% of them. And when they get to 12th grade, only about 39% of them. So what we're seeing is that they're actually learning English, acquiring new English skills as they go on in grade. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because when we look at PARCC results in some of our assessments in the older grades, we generally see that our Hispanic students slightly outperform our African American students. That's different with the KRA. They're actually underperforming when compared to African American students, and we believe that to be largely a function of the language acquisition that happens early on in elementary school that enables them to catch up. So some of our other student groups are shown here, and most of them have remained steady over the past few years. We've provided the all-student comparison group on top, along with our economic disadvantage subgroup, our English learners, and our students with disabilities. We did see a slight decrease among our economic disadvantage. Most of the subgroups have remained pretty steady over the past years in terms of readiness. Question?
Could you go back to slide kindergarten readiness trends, city schools in Maryland? It's all clear right here, but just to make it clear in my head, it's showing that, looking at the city schools, the kids who were in pre-K performed better in 2017. However, they went down in 2018.
So they were at 46% and then went down to 45.
So they continuously going, okay. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So one unique piece of information that the KRA gives us is what are the backgrounds, where are our students coming from when they enter kindergarten, and we call that their prior care setting. So this is collected on the KRA as part of a parent survey. So parents are asked, of the kindergarten students, where did they attend pre-K? Did they go to a nursery school? Did they go to Head Start or other programs? Overall, about 63% of our students attended a pre-K program. So that's really good. That's more than half. And then we've broken that up into some sort of subcategories. Pre-K that took place in city schools or Baltimore City Public Schools. Pre-K in city schools that was at a Judy Center site, and then pre-K from another Maryland county or otherwise in the state. So one change that we've noticed this year versus previous years is that we saw a large increase, almost a doubling in students who came from home care. So that was up to 11%, where in prior years it was more like around 5%. So we are seeing a higher proportion of kids come from that home care setting, which tends to be one that does not prepare them as well for kindergarten as some of the other settings do. Here we're looking at performance by prior care setting. So we have our two pre-K programs on the left side of that bar, our pre-K in non-Judy Center city schools, and then our pre-K in city schools with the Judy Center. So we see here that pre-K with city schools and Judy Center are performing higher than some of the other pre-K settings in city schools with a readiness rate of 54.5%. The highest prior care in terms of demonstrating readiness is coming from the non-public nursery school, which is achieving a readiness of 61.4%. Overall, our pre-K programs are really showing a lot of value when compared to some of the other prior care settings. So this is the slide we were alluding to earlier, where we've now broken out our pre-K program into pre-K programs that did not have a Judy Center site associated with them and pre-K programs that did. And you can see that the readiness of students coming from our pre-K Judy Center sites has increased over the past few years up to about 55% where it is now. Our other sites have tended to fluctuate a little bit, ending up at 44% in this current school year. So one really neat thing we've been doing in the past few years is to try and dig deeper into what's going on with some of our prior care settings. So as I noted on one of the previous slides, the prior care setting that demonstrated the highest rate of readiness was this non-public nursery school. But as you can imagine, the students who come from that setting represent a very different socioeconomic and demographic group than students who might attend home care or some of these other settings. So what we've done on the research team here is we used a statistical model that controls for demographic characteristics such as farms, student with disability status, gender, English learner, and race and ethnicity. And then we've pulled out the effect or isolated the contribution of the prior care setting to their odds of being ready. And while it's a very complicated model, what we can see here on this graph is that when we compare everybody to a baseline or a student who went to city schools pre-K, they have an odds ratio of about 1. We see that Judy Centers are much higher, about 1.68 times as likely to be ready when you control for all these other demographics as students in other pre-K. What I really think is interesting is now when we look at that non-public nursery school setting, once we've controlled for demographics such as economic disadvantage, it's actually showing that they prepare students at a lower rate than some of our pre-K programs, both with Judy Centers and without. So we've gone here and taken a deeper look, trying to take into account all those demographics and really assess what the program is offering and not just the readiness of students coming from certain backgrounds.
All right. So for the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to discuss some of the initiatives that we're doing in pre-K. First, we're going to talk about Judy Centers and just some of the things that we think have contributed to their success, some of the lessons learned that we've taken from Judy Centers, the professional development that's being offered by my office, and then some of our recruitment and outreach initiatives. So in Baltimore City, we actually have 11 Judy Centers, which is the most of any jurisdiction in the state. And Judy Centers provide comprehensive and wraparound support for families within a school catchment area, starting at age 0 for families, 0 to 5. And they provide a wealth of resources from aftercare programs to parenting classes for parents to just kind of like on-the-spot support. We've really found that when we, in early learning, when we discuss and talk about the whole child, it really is not just about the student, but it's also about the family. And so Judy Centers are really able to address and support those needs. And they're also able to support the Head Start and child care providers that also are within that catchment area. So anyone who is serving or anyone who is supporting children and families is able to receive extra support from the Judy Center. So on this slide, we've got the schools listed that have Judy Centers. Again, as I said, there are 11 here in Baltimore City. And on the left, we have some data from Burke. They did an external evaluation for us from the 2017-2018 school year. And we had two kind of really interesting pieces of data that we found amongst Judy Center students. The children who participated in our aftercare program, we found scored 11 points higher than the other students in that Judy Center. And for our students who participated in summer programming, that those students scored 5 points higher than other Judy Center students. So already we're really trying to figure out and isolate what are the different types of programs that we're doing that are most successful for our students. So here we just have a location map of where the Judy Centers are overlaid with the community indicators map. So there you will see that the locations of the Judy Centers have really been strategically placed in some of our highest needs areas. So what lessons have we learned from the Judy Centers? We are trying to figure out how can we replicate and take some of these models and share it with the rest of our schools. So for this school year, 18-19, in my office, I've actually added one FTE dedicated solely to working with and supporting families and communities. Because again, as I said, it's not necessarily just about the academics, but it's also about the support that we can provide in this kind of wraparound and comprehensive way. So we're really trying to figure out how can we help and support other schools with being able to expand some of these models. We are able to provide summer programming and enrichment, partnering with the Office of Differentiated Learning. Over this past summer, they were able to offer 2 pre-K classrooms in their Summer Arts and Learning Academy sites. For this upcoming school year, we're hoping to do 1 to 2 classrooms at each one of those sites so that we can see if we can increase the number of summer opportunities for our pre-K students. Typically, pre-K doesn't make it into the summer or aftercare landscape because of the age of the student. So we're trying to see if we start offering some of those programs earlier, will that have an effect on our students' readiness? This year, we are doing more collaboration with community schools. Their model is very similar to what Judy Centers do, so really trying to help and support them with thinking about how they can take the great things that they're doing for older students and how they can now start to support that 0 to 5 community. I've had a couple more meetings with administrators just around early learning best practices, really trying to share all the things that we've learned and making sure that in our schools that our pre-K and our kindergarten classrooms are also being brought to the forefront. And we've had a number of professional development opportunities through our Ready for Kindergarten grant that we get from the state every single year. So just to kind of share some of the professional development that we've done. For the last 2 years, we've done a book study with all of our teachers. Last year, the book was called Choice Time, which was about bringing choice time into classrooms. This time it's about purposeful play, really trying to push intentional play into classrooms. We've shared that with our pre-K teachers, with our pre-K paraeducators. We have been working with one ILED and her network of assistant principals have actually done a book study as well. So we're trying to figure out how can we, again, take that model and replicate it for more administrators. Challenging behavior has been another thing that we're really trying to help and support our teachers with. And last year, our KRA scores were a bit lower in math, so we really made sure to do some more targeted training in math for this year's professional development. This year, we have also started inviting our Head Start providers and our child care providers to our PDs. So every time we have our systemic professional development days, we also open it up to them to come and attend as well so that we're all getting the same learning and same knowledge together. And we were also awarded the Striving Readers Literacy Grant, in which 15% was set aside for birth through 5. So for year 1 thus far, we have bought Raising a Reader, which brings books, and we've brought that into our families, our 0 to 3 families. So they've partnered with our infants and toddlers teachers. So they go out, and every week when they're there, they kind of switch out the books. And so I actually just visited a family last week, and mom is really enjoying the books, and she's switching them out, and everyone's really loving that. So that's going really well. And this year, we also brought that model to a few Head Start and child care providers as well. This summer, we plan to partner with Ready at 5 to host a literacy and math institute, and also kind of bringing some SEL ties all throughout that as well, so that we're making sure that we're addressing social emotional learning. And then for this upcoming school year, we're planning to partner with our own pre-K teachers to have them to start providing literacy coaching to their own colleagues, and then also to child care and Head Start providers, so that we can build our own capacity in early literacy practices. So next we've got recruitment and outreach. So pre-K enrollment starts on April 23rd, in case you didn't know. Please tell everyone to sign up. So this year we are trying to do a number of events to really increase the number of our pre-K students. So we are partnering with community schools to host open houses. We're hoping to do the month of May as kind of our open house month. And so we have created a tool toolkit to give to schools to kind of walk them through how to host these open houses. And again, we're going to just open it up to any schools that are in the city that want to kind of figure out how they can really increase their enrollment. My office has started to do some kind of targeted family engagement activities, parent cafes with schools, really trying to help teach them and show them the model in order to build up their own capacity so that they're able to make sure that they're not forgetting those pre-K and K families that are in their school. We've been partnering with the Office of Engagement and ESOL really to do a bit more outreach to our bilingual families, making sure that just at a minimum that all of our documents are translated so that we can at least remove that barrier. And then in the spring, on April 27th, we're going to host a day of play, which is essentially a citywide 0 to 5 kind of outreach day. And we are inviting our Head Start partners, childcare partners, so that we can all just kind of message to families the importance of being ready for school and making sure that any parents that need to, that they know how to register for things, where to go. And we're hoping to be able to have the vision screening, dental screening, immunizations, all of those things in one place so that we can hopefully eliminate that barrier for families so that we can at least support them in being able to get all of their documents ready to go for registration. That's it.
Wow, that's a lot of information. There's a lot going on. It's very exciting. Questions? I have a couple. Okay.
Sorry, I have just a few.
Okay.
First of all, congratulations. I'm excited every time you say Judy Center. I have to say I was here when we brought Judy Centers to Baltimore, so it's exciting to see it growing. But one of the questions that I know from way back when to now, and we constantly ask it, but given where we are now with the Kerwin recommendations and everyone is talking about, the idea of early learning, how can we move a little faster with this partnership between Head Start and our pre-K programs, and especially the things that you've learned from the Judy Center? I mean, we have the data now that says what the best practices are in terms of really having students who are ready. Mm-hmm. And still we have just 11 sites that basically have all of that. Mm-hmm. So how can we push this out a little bit faster?
I think we're doing a better job of, I can at least say in the last 2 years, of really partnering with our Head Start. I think for a while there was an us versus them, or felt like we were all competing for the same children. So I think in the last few years we've really started to understand that there are more than enough children in the city for all of us to kind of have our niche. Part of the MOU that we have with Head Start is that they serve 3-year-olds and we serve 4-year-olds, because we've just seen from the data that that's actually the best trajectory for students. When you're 3, you go to Head Start. When you're 4, you go to pre-K. And that shows that students are much more successful when it kind of works that way. We have really tried to, which is why we opened up our professional development, to kind of open our doors to say, like, come in and learn with us. I think we have to be very delicate and not to say that we are the experts in it, because no one appreciates when you come in and say, I know better than you. But I think that they have been much more willing and much more open to come in and sit at the table with us, and even to have us begin to start coming in and just kind of sharing the things that we know as well. We also have a citywide transition document that we're working on. We're really trying to kind of perfect what that looks like. But it's essentially a document that will come from childcare and Head Start providers that a parent or the provider can fill out, that just talks about the child and says, does this child, are they prone to miss school? Or what are just some family considerations that we should know about this child? Right now, it's on a really small scale of the number of those forms that we get filled out, but we would love to be able to do a better job of transitioning our students over from Head Start into our schools. And I think once we can start to kind of really establish that connection, that will do a bit better job of replicating the success that we've had in Judy Centers. Another challenge to that is Head Starts are not necessarily zoned like we are zoned. So you could have children who attend a Head Start on the east side because it's a more convenient location for their parent, as opposed to because that's their zone school. So sometimes you don't have students who are transitioning in that same building. You have a child who went to school over here, and then they're going to end up going to pre-K at somewhere else. So it's really just trying to kind of figure out how we get all of these things together for this kind of perfect transition.
Okay. I mean, I would say that's probably happening everywhere now because we're pretty much choice from pre-K, you know, through 12. The other one that I'm going to ask, because I don't want to take up all of it, is I'm really struck by the fact when you said that especially for the English language learners, they're getting a 0 essentially for some things because they don't have the language skills, which for me then says that this is not assessing their readiness at all. So what are we doing or can we do to do something about that? That really doesn't make any sense. This data is useless for me. If a child probably has a lot more skills and we're simply saying 0 because the test is given in English. And then that'll be it for me.
And to piggyback on what you're just saying with the technology and the state that we're in this country, we should have a test or something that we can do to evaluate those kids instead of getting a 0. It should be.
Well, we have teachers that
Yeah, we have,
Right.
exactly. So I don't know, I don't understand that at all. But you probably mentioned this already. I'm so impressed with the center. Could you tell me where you're getting the funding, and where's the funding for the center coming?
Yes, great question. So currently those
For the
centers.
Judy Center, yes.
Yes, they're funded, it's a mix of, we have some private dollars that fund it from the Baltimore Community Foundation. There's some funding that comes from city schools, and then there's some funding that comes from the state. So we've been able to kind of braid all of these funds in order to have these centers up and running. We keep our staffing very low at the site, so we only have 2 full-time staff that work there. I'm sure they would appreciate more staff, but we keep it low so that we are able to use all of those fundings to go directly to families and for programming.
And I'm going to end with this question. I cannot think of a better program to get a grant. I cannot think of a better program. What a great program. And and to me, I don't know, and I don't know if Allison can answer this question. Is someone looking out or evaluating programs, grant funding institutes or something to search out some grants for this? It sounds like a perfect program to get grants, to put that program in all the schools that need it. Are we reaching out to investigate programs?
I think that you all are watching grant opportunities that would fund a Judy Center, and I think we've expanded Judy. There's been some expanding Judy pre-K grants the last few years that have helped with some of the Judy Center grants.
Yeah, I think currently the way that they're set up and structured, the state has to essentially be the ones to open them up. So currently, we couldn't open up a Judy Center. We could open up something similar, like in Baltimore City, if we wanted to do that. I'm not sure if that will change as Kerwin is starting to roll out, as they're really starting to think about different modes of funding. Again, the way that we've done it here in Baltimore City with this public-private partnership is unlike how anyone else has been able to do it in the state. So in that respect, I feel like we are a leader in being able to show like what is possible if you're really able to look at all of these different methods of funding.
And I will say to you that there are opportunities out there in addition to what you're getting. And I hope that you're absorbing what I'm saying, because there are grant agencies or organizations that would be willing to give finances for that. And maybe you ought to investigate where other districts are getting their grants, looking around the country, because this is a perfect, easy opportunity to get a grant for the work that they're doing and how successful the program is. And I hope what I'm saying just doesn't go out the door. I hope somebody's listening,
Oh, yeah, I'm listening.
because I would think that this would be a wonderful opportunity to write a grant,
Yeah,
really. Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
I mean, so I will just say to that, I will, like I said, we do actively watch the federal grants and the state grants when they become available. We will watch for other grants as much as we can. I mean, a grant office is something that we did used to have that we don't have anymore, so that is a challenge I just want to be realistic about. We did used to have that capacity that we don't really have anymore. So that's one thing that, when we make central office cuts, that's one of the things that got cut years ago, so that is a challenge. The other thing I will say is that, I'm sorry I stepped out for a while, but I'm dealing with the Kerwin legislation. And, one thing I think we have to keep in mind is keeping pressure on the state to actually fund things correctly. And this year there is money for early learning, but it's not going to Baltimore City. It's going to expand pre-K and other jurisdictions that didn't have full day pre-K. And so it's just, I would just express a frustration that I thought the purpose of the Kerwin Commission was to make up the gap in the districts that have the large adequacy gaps. And there's a number of ways in which the bill's not doing that, and early learning is one of them.
It's interesting. Thank you.
Okay,
This was
thank you.
very, very informative and helpful and exciting.
Great.
Very exciting. Thank you. Speaking of English learners, we have another.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Janice Lane, ED of Teaching and Learning.
Hi, Laura Ohanian, Director of Differentiated Learning.
Hi, Maria Remore, ESOL Coordinator.
So we're going to go through the English learner update today. We're going to do our best because there's a number of slides to do it as quickly as possible. But we're really excited to be able to share the information today. Do you need me to talk
Can
a
you
little bit
speak?
louder?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. Yep, we will do our best to get through the presentation as quickly as possible. I know there's a number of slides, so there's plenty of time for questions and other opportunities. Our vision for our English learner program includes looking at students holistically and supporting the whole child. We're also looking at ensuring that all stakeholders are supporting the needs of English learners, not just their ESOL teachers. We are now at 7.2% of our population as English learners. We'll go over the next few slides the growth, but last year we were at 6.6%, which is quite a significant increase. The past few years when we've shown this slide, we've shown the top 5 countries of birth and languages. I think it's important to note that our English learners come from 84 different countries and speak 59 different languages. We often get the question of, why don't we always just do everything in Spanish? Well, it wouldn't be helpful to the other 58 languages students. And so that's one. As you can see, the majority of our students speak Spanish, but a number of our students speak a number of different languages, partly due to the fact that we're a refugee resettlement center, and so we see kids from all over the world. I would note one thing. I think Spanish is our top. I suspect our second most common language is actually French, because it's a very common second language for many kids, and what you see here is first language. So many of our kids who speak other languages or families also speak French.
Laura,
Yes.
would you mind, good afternoon, would you mind defining what an English language learner is?
Sure.
What is our definition as a system of
Sure.
English language learner?
Oh, that's a great question. We actually talk about how you test in for English language, and it's based on assessment. We assess all students who come into the country or who have a native language at home, who speak a first language at home that's other than English, and kids that are adopted in cases. And we screen them using, in K through 12, and Maria will talk about this on the assessment slide, we screen them using protocols from the state. And if they hit a certain criteria, which is below 4.5 on their proficiency, they're considered an English learner. We also have some definitions in the appendix of some of these other, which I'll talk about some other categories of English learners, and I'll try to make sure I'm defining as I go. Yeah, no problem. So as you can see, the population growth, our English learners are increasing quite rapidly. Overall, we've almost doubled our numbers over the past 8 to 10 years. What I would want to note is at the middle and high school level, though the numbers are lower, we've seen quite rapid growth at those levels. Here on this slide, on the left side, you'll see all the schools where the population of students is 25% or more English learners. However, we wanted to make sure that everybody understood, which is on the right side, that we have English learners at a number of different schools, over 100 different schools. And so, but the populations are in different proportions at different schools. So we have some very large, what we would call high impact schools, and we have low impact. Over the past 3 years, as the number of students in the district has decreased slightly, the number of English learners has increased quite significantly. We've also seen an increase in the number of students reporting speaking a language other than English, and I'm glad that you asked about the difference. Speaking a language other than English does not necessarily qualify you to be an English learner. It depends on your English proficiency. We also are looking at our RELs, which are exited English learners. Those are monitored for 2 years. They're officially referred to as reclassified English learners for 2 years, and we monitor and support them. We also have the numbers of immigrant students, which the state defines as someone who's been in the country less than 3 years, which is sort of an odd definition because, you know, my family was immigrants. You're immigrants if you're immigrants, right? It doesn't just end at a certain time frame, but the state ends it at a certain time frame, which is why you see the numbers are a little odd. I think it's really important to think about our English learners as a continuum of learners, even amongst themselves. We have dual identified English learners, which are English learners with disabilities. We have our gifted English learners, students with interrupted formal schooling. These are students with major gaps in their instruction. We have our refugee students, and we have what's considered a long-term EL, which the state defines as more than 6 years. The research suggests it's anywhere between 5 to 9 years to learn English, so 6 years is a little low, but it's a reasonable bar. It can take a little bit longer to get fully proficient in academic English. I would like to note here, we've done major efforts to identify gifted ELs, and we've seen an increase from 0.7 to 2.1% identified. And I think that's partly due to the partnership within the department, and I think the training we've done with ESOL teachers and the use of nonverbal screener. So we're really excited about those numbers. Here you'll see a breakdown of our dual identified or our English learners with disabilities. Though we have a number, over 400 identified, the majority are identified for L or A or B. There are times where we see higher percentages among some of our unique populations, depending on sort of refugee status can be based on a number of factors, and the health of children can be one of them. And so we might see higher percentages of more significant disabilities as a result.
So this slide shows our growth in terms of our staffing over the last 4 years. And as you can see, our number of teachers as well as our paraeducators and educational associates has increased over the last several years. The non-instructional assistants, that number has decreased as we've attempted to increase the paraeducators because there's more flexibility in their use. They can support instruction as well as working with families. As Laura noted, the enrollment numbers have dramatically increased over the last several years, and the staffing increases as a result of that. That, of course, means recruiting and hiring larger numbers of teachers, and we've had some success with that through some partnerships with the Human Capital Office and working with them to seek out recruiting events and work with universities that turn out larger numbers of ESOL teachers. Here you can see that we have expanded the number of ESOL sites, the schools where we offer ESOL, well, I shouldn't say offer, the schools where we provide ESOL services. As students enroll in these schools, we put ESOL supports and ESOL teachers in the schools. What's interesting to note here is that this year, for the first time, we had to add 7 schools mid-year. When the October EL enrollment count went in and we analyzed it, we realized that these 7 schools suddenly had an EL population that really necessitated an ESOL teacher to provide those services.
So with that, do we have, so that also means that we have the staffing for it to support that increase?
Yeah, we make adjustments as needed, so we'll look at other sites. We run a comparative ratio, so we look at the ratio of students to teachers. And though we don't get an increase in staffing, we predict for an increase in enrollment. And if that enrollment happens to be at a new site, then we adjust based on, so we move a 0.5 position from one site to another, for example.
These are the assessment practices that Laura alluded to. Our practices for initial identification and annual assessment are in line with the rest of the state, as indicated in our ESSA accountability plan. The initial identification, the assessment that we use is determined by the grade level. Kindergarten uses a slightly different assessment. They use the kindergarten access placement test. This year, grades 1 through 12 statewide switched to the WIDA screener, which is a slightly different assessment, but still part of the WIDA suite of assessments. And then for the annual state assessment, we continue to use access. Under Maryland's accountability system, with the changes that came about from ESSA, 10% of the calculation for schools that have an N size of 10 or more ELs is based on their progress toward English language proficiency, and that's measured by their performance on the access assessment. Progress is defined as meeting the growth target for their cohort, their year in service, or exiting service if they happen to exit in that first year. On the other side of the slide, you can see what the ELP targets, the English language proficiency targets, are for each year for the student, depending on where their baseline level is. For SY 17-18, because we don't yet have the data, obviously, for this year, the testing window just closed, 50% of ELs had to meet the ELP growth target for a school to have met that target. It then increases 2% each year through SY 29-30. As a district, 50%, that 50% target was met. This next slide shows how that target broke out by individual schools. The red line on the slide indicates that 50% benchmark. Schools that have more than, it's separated out by grade band, so schools that have elementary and middle school, for example, our pre-K to 8s, have a separate measurement for their elementary grades versus their middle school grades, and so they have a separate bar on the graph. And as you can see, many of our schools did meet that 50% mark. It's particularly interesting to note that we have 18 schools that have an N size of greater than 75, and 12 of those schools, 2/3 of them, did meet that 50% target. This is a breakdown of the 2018 WIDA proficiency levels. Again, this is last year's data because we don't have the 2019 yet. But what you can see is that as students move through the elementary grades, we see larger numbers of students at higher proficiency levels, particularly in grades 2 to 3 and 4 to 5, which is in line with the research that we know about language acquisition. As Laura noted, 6 years is considered long-term EL, 5 to 9 years, the amount of time. When students hit 2nd, 3rd grade, 4th, 5th grade, that's when we really start to see, for those students who came to us in pre-K or K, they're in line with that research for language acquisition.
On the next two slides, we're going to look at the performance on PARC for the percent approaching, meeting, and exceeding, so 3s, 4s, and 5s. For our English learners, which is the red bar, the yellow bar is our exited English learners, and the blue bar is non-English learners. And as you'll note, in both 3-5 and 6-8, in both ELA and math, though our English learners, there's obviously work to be done, and in some cases we're not as surprised by the results, just given their language proficiency. So if you're, for example, if you're at proficiency 1 or 2, we wouldn't expect a 4 or 5 on a PARC assessment in that first year or second year. But our exited ELs are doing quite well, which I think this is one of the ways we measure the success of our program, is once our students, because it's a temporary placement, which is another good reason for you to ask about what is an English learner. It's not a permanent assignment, right? You eventually test out of the program. So the question is, how do they perform? And they're performing quite well. And at the high school level, we're actually seeing the same trend, which we were pretty excited about because you don't always see that. But our exited English learners in ELA and math are really outperforming their peers. Here, we are looking at just ELs versus non-ELs, and again, looking at 3s, 4s, and 5s over time. So those approaching, meeting, and exceeding. Again, we put the 3s in there because there's an expectation at certain proficiency level we would expect you to be at least approaching, not necessarily meeting or exceeding because you're still qualified for ESOL service. I would note here that you'll notice that we are starting to make trends upward, and during this time, you'll note that the N size has, in some cases, doubled or tripled. So not only have we seen improvements in their PARCC scores, and I think from 8 to almost 16% is impressive, but that the N size has increased quite rapidly during that time. Here we're looking at performance, right? So this is looking at achievement compared to their peers, again, English learners versus non-ELs. And this is 4s and 5s. And though we still see sort of a lower performance amongst our English learners, I guess, and again, there's a number of reasons why you might not see them achieving a 4 and a 5 while they're in service, you'll note that they're improving. The number of kids that are scoring 4s and 5s is improving, and it's tripled the number. So we've explored sort of the why around this. What are the different reasons, along with getting, years of specific instruction around academic English. We've looked at their attendance rates, and what you notice is our ELs, our exited English learners, and our students speaking a language other than English have higher attendance rates than their peers, which could potentially contribute to this difference in performance.
As we dug into what was happening with our schools and our students that are doing well, Laura noted attendance. The other piece we started obviously to look at was instruction and what works with instruction. And things that we're finding as emerging as commonalities across schools are collaborative planning, co-teaching models, integrated instruction. So we're integrating and aligning ESOL language instruction to content instruction. The incorporation of both language standards and language objectives into instruction, and support for general educators. We have a 3-year ESOL strategy, which we're currently in year 2. Year 1 is in your appendix slides if you want to take a look at that at some point. But we're currently in year 2, and we continue to align to the same areas as the blueprint with leadership, literacy, and whole child. And we are focusing on professional development in those areas, as well as moving forward curriculum, and I'll talk about that more in a moment, and whole child supports, including things like working with restorative practices. But again, we'll get more into that in a few moments. One of our big initiatives has been to launch a Welcome Center. And as we move forward with that this year, the Welcome Center is intended to establish a welcoming environment for emerging bilingual families who are new to the city. The idea being that we will deal with their enrollment in city schools in one place, which would also allow them to receive their language screening so that it doesn't have to be done at the school level. We'll know when they hit the door at the school that they're an English learner already. We will also be doing social emotional screeners so that we can pass on appropriate referrals to the necessary offices and agencies as families need. This is particularly important with our refugee population, as they often come with those needs. With our curriculum, one of our big lifts this year and our big projects has been aligning ESOL modules to the new curriculum, to the Wit and Wisdom curriculum for ELA. We've also implemented a newly developed ESOL English 2 curriculum. In addition, we continue to work on revisions around our other resources for all grade levels as well as our newcomers. Bilingual programming is something else that we have been looking at. Currently, Lakeland has a bilingual program that is now in its 3rd year. They've expanded up through 2nd grade. We are also exploring some other options for bilingual programming, one of which is detailed here on the slide, which is a potential program that would be Spanish-English immersion at an elementary and or possibly middle school. Additional supports include extended learning and enrichment, and we are focusing those areas in both after-school programming and summer learning. After school, we're utilizing partnerships with a number of agencies in addition to our own ESOL staff and school-based staff. For summer learning, we continue with our program for high school for overage undercredited students. We're providing support to elementary as well. We are also proposing this year for the first time a middle school program for ELs. Finally, when we look at our professional development, we continue to focus that around not just ESOL teachers and the ESOL bilingual staff, but also looking at providing professional development for school-based staff and district staff. And to that end, one of the things we've been focusing on this year specifically is our participation in monthly PD sessions that look at the continuum of learners, that being aligned specifically to the district initiative for navigating academic planning. So again, aligning that with content that and the new curriculum, as well as looking at how that impacts our ELs.
As Maria mentioned, we have been working diligently on implementing restorative practices amongst our ESOL teachers. We are using the circles, I should actually start by saying this is in collaboration with Open Society Institute, who has provided us quite a bit of support in this area. And we are doing this to help move oral language amongst our English learners, so to leverage circles to move oral language. Additionally, we are also ensuring that our English learners can actually participate in the circles. So as the district moves to expand restorative practices in schools, we want to make sure our English learners have the scaffolding needed to advance and participate in the circles. And so as we've been doing this as a team of ESOL leadership and teachers, which is how we approach most of our projects in ESOL, we've been thinking through strategies that our ESOL teachers can then give the general educators, or the trainers can give general educators to support. So for example, one of the things we've been doing is using emoji cards, right? Because those are more universal. So if a student can't participate, they can at least use an emoji card, or a sentence frame, or a sentence starter, or a word bank, right? So that there's options for them to choose from so that they can fully participate in a circle if their language proficiency is, and using that oral language proficiency to eventually build to writing. Because the research suggests for English learners, it's much better to start with oral and then go to writing, unlike in some cases it might be better to start with writing, do oral, then go back to writing, but for English learners it's much better to start with the oral language. And so we use the circles to leverage that. So for writing prompts and that sort of thing as well. We also partner with the Newcomer Project. They provide support at 38 different schools. When Maria mentioned at the Welcome Center, we'll be doing a social emotional screener with any new students. Those referrals will go to the Newcomer Project. That's staff bilingual related service providers that can work with students depending on the results of that needs assessment. We also have a number of partnerships, and we really can't do this work without our partnerships. We work with a number of different agencies, even in our summer program. We are working with Refugee Youth Project and Soccer Without Borders to provide supports for the students, but we have a number of partners throughout the city that we work with. So that's our entire presentation. I would note we were not able to show our video around the ESOL programming that we've developed because it's 6 minutes and there isn't time for it, but it's on the website and we'll also make sure it's sent to you. So I would really recommend you look at it. It talks a lot about collaboration. It talks about the student's perspective. It talks about our approach to the whole child. We spent the past few months with support from communications creating just this video to explain how we do ESOL programming in Baltimore City.
Which colleges and universities do you work with? And in addition to that, do they have internship or clinical for the students?
Oh, that's a great question. So we work with a number of different, we work with UMBC, Notre Dame. They have pretty large programs. We actually have leadership staff teaching in all of the programs, which is how we recruit. So we're literally in the classes recruiting. A lot of times there might be internship opportunities, but we will offer conditional certs for students that are in programs. So when Maria said we did recruitment, just to give you a sense, we hired about 53 teachers last year. Just last year.
Maybe I didn't hear you. Which colleges
so we,
and universities?
University of Maryland, Notre Dame. Towson is starting a program, so we are on the front end of that starting program so that we can start recruiting in it right away. So we've been meeting with them regularly. Yep, Loyola is another one. Did I miss anybody else?
Those are the big ones in the immediate area, but we're also branching out and starting to reach out to universities further out as well. But in the immediate area, it would be those four.
I haven't heard you say Morgan State University, Coppin State University.
Yeah, we are partnering with those that have the ESOL program.
Okay.
So if they're interested in starting an ESOL program, like for example, Towson was interested, we started meeting with them. We're happy to meet with anybody who's interested in starting an ESOL program.
Okay. So the
'Cause
schools that you work with have the program?
That's right.
Okay,
So they have the master track or the
I
certification track.
understand.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for the presentation, by the way. It's great to have the information. The middle school, do we have the number of students that are entering into our system at the middle school, at the secondary level? And how do we target and track their progress as they enter in the system a bit later than the elementary students do? Did you already say it? Did you?
No, I understand what you're asking. And so it's a really great question. You'll notice I have to get you the numbers. I don't know them off the top of my head. There are some kids in our middle school who are long-term ELs. They've been in ESOL, but many of them are actually new to the country at that time, and high school as well. And you'll notice here, if you look at our 4-5, you'll notice that our level ones are at, if I can read that correctly, I don't have it, 13.9%. But when you go to 6-8, it's over 30%. And what that shows you is the new enrollment, right? So it's all the newer students end up with lower proficiency numbers, which is
Sure.
why you see.
Sure, I said
Yeah,
sure.
of course, because they're new to the country, right? Which is why it's interesting if you see, we start with kindergarten being our largest group of level 1s and 2s. It goes down, and then at middle and high school, to your point, we get a lot of new enrollees,
Right.
many of them with interrupted formal schooling, and we see a major increase again. So, as Maria mentioned, the majority of our kids are exiting between 3rd and 5th grade. And then we're getting a whole new cohort of students in 6th and 9th grade, in that 6th, 9th grade window. We don't see past 9th grade because they don't have enough credits to be past 9th grade, not because of age. If that makes sense.
Sure. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Another question with you mentioned middle school summer programming. It has been proposed. Where are we looking to host that summer program for middle school students?
We actually want to host it at NAF with the high school
Okay.
program. So we have a high school program where we partner with Refugee Youth Project and Soccer Without Borders. We would run our middle school program there. Our focus would be sort of an introduction to American culture and history. So part of the struggle we see with some of our English learners is when they start American history, it starts at Reconstruction, which means they've missed a whole bunch of history, right? And so we want to spend time this summer building language through the social studies. And so it'll be a focus. And then as an enrichment activity, they'll be working with Refugee Youth Project and Soccer Without Borders to embed some activities for them. So we'll build the language, we'll build the history knowledge that we know that we need to fill that gap for many of the new students, to your point, that have come into the country.
And I know that there is a work group, I think, in the social studies area that's working on a curriculum, I think, that deals with Baltimore. And could we potentially partner with that group in the development of a summer learning curriculum?
That's a great
To
question.
use maybe aspects from that to incorporate into the EL?
Yeah, that's a great
learning.
question. I didn't even thought about it, so we'll loop back with the team.
I think it would be nice. And then finally, what are we doing? I heard about the restorative practices and us building on that with the EL population because it is clearly the fastest growing student population that we currently have. So that's important. And going to several schools, particularly high schools, one in particular comes to mind, Forest Park High School. They're having some challenges with retaining the EL population consistently throughout the day. and it is in some schools impacting attendance and enrollment because culturally work is different. The type of work that parents, families are engaged in is a little different than what the majority of us in the United States are used to. So are we engaging those families in a way to also articulate attendance, like the benefit of being present in school and how that impacts their growth and their ability to learn the language and embed that throughout all of the content areas?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. So in full transparency, secondary engagement and, you know, the continuing on, especially for our overage students with limited formal schooling, who've had major gaps in their instruction, is an area where we continue to do a lot of work, and is probably the area that we spend the most amount of time trying to figure out what's the best strategies for supporting this population. And you know, there's a number of reasons why students will be absent. They'll be absent if their parent needs somebody to take care of the younger siblings, for example, because they have to work. They'll be absent if they're just going to make money for that day because that particular week they need to make enough money to meet the rent. They're just going to stay out, right? So there's a number of factors that we work around to try to support them. One of the things I think that will be most effective is when the Welcome Center is fully up and running. As they come in, we can have the conversations with the families and really provide them a clear pathway for graduation that includes our summer programming and during our school year programming. We've actually been meeting with College and Career Readiness, and just actually today, for example, we met, and we started talking about what are some other flexible scheduling options we can think through. And also thinking through a partnership with BCCC. We've tried that in the past, and we're excited that we feel like the conversations are starting again in a really productive way. So that's going to be a really great opportunity. We also have parent workshops we've started about American schools and, you know, the difference, right? So what is the expectations, what's going to happen? And so those workshops that's part of our, if you look at our ESOL strategy, that's in there, to have those parent workshops to introduce them. But in full transparency, it's a tough issue, right? And it's hard to compete with the monetary demands that families have. And so we continue to struggle with it. That's why we have a summer program for original credit. It's why we're starting middle school early. It's why we went over the past 4 years, which wasn't clear from this, we focused and reduced our student-to-teacher ratios at the secondary level to try to match them to the elementary level. Our focus has been secondary around, we're starting specialized PD for our secondary teachers. We started the restorative practices work partly to build those relationships because they can drive a lot of this. But the reality is our kids support their families in a lot of cases in a number of different ways, not just fiscally. And so there's priorities that we have to compete with, and we have to figure out how to, it's hard, to be honest with you.
With that, I don't want to take up time, but with that, I would be interested in hearing more ways that we're partnering with college and career readiness also, because I heard you just mention that, and maybe CTE programs. How are we connecting all of that into the English language learning component of our district priorities? Because I think it is important if we marry college and careers to an overall well-rounded academic program that could potentially get better buy-in from families within the community and just strengthen the work that we all are moving forward to do. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Those are great questions.
Thank you very much. This was a big presentation, a lot of information. Thank you, and a big challenge.
Yeah, and make sure you watch the video.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, thank you.
Oh, I'm good.
And so now we're going to find out about finding all these teachers and so on, and principals.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Grant Skinner, the Chief Human Capital Officer.
Go ahead, Diane.
I'm Diane Sellers, Manager of Recruitment and Partnerships.
Sarah Deal, Executive Director of Recruitment and Staffing.
For the last couple of years, semi-annually, every 6 months or so, we have brought forward an update on teacher and principal pipelines. And a couple of years ago, that began mostly focused on updates for our alternative certification programs for both teachers and principals, and we've been expanding the last few times to make sure that we give a fuller picture of all of our various pipelines. And I will start with a reference back to our most recent presentation to the Teaching and Learning Committee, which was in September. So at small risk of a moment of repetition, I will say we gave a profile of an example of a school, which was Commodore John Rogers, and showed a picture of the teachers in that school who come from Morgan and Coppin and Towson and UMBC and Teach for America and the Baltimore City Teaching Residency and Urban Teachers, all of these various programs. We talked about model teachers and lead teachers who either are or have served in those schools, assistant principals who've been trained internally, principal residents who have worked there, and the principal himself who serves as a mentor principal and has been a transformational principal. So I share that again as a goal of what we want to achieve, which is schools that have a wide variety of staff from various pipelines who are really working together to move a school. So we will share today about different pipeline building activities, internal and external, traditional and alternative, new and continuing. And to start, I will talk about how this all fits together outside of a school, district-wide. You see here essentially a ladder of how different pipelines can connect together over the course of a career for someone who's interested in moving from one column here to the next column. And there's also certainly leaders who find that their place is in teaching or in the assistant principal role or in the model teacher role, and therefore they're not interested in ever moving to the right side of what you see here, but we want to make sure that the opportunity is there for individuals who are interested in that kind of leadership transition. So we'll talk about the principal pipeline and the teacher pipeline, starting with principals. We have a number of strategies, all happening at once, starting with expanding our recruitment to ensuring that we are selectively screening and strategically placing new principals. And then once principals are in the role, we've been expanding the induction activities that they participate in, and also developing them in their role so that they can expand their influence to other schools or district-wide activities if they're interested as well. Part of our principal recruitment work and principal development work is in partnership with new leaders and has been for many years. This shows the last couple of cohorts of principal residents. In the 17-18 school year, we had 10 principal residents. 2 of them are current first-year principals right now, and several others remain in the principal candidate pool. I will come back to that data point there about 2 of 10 in a moment. This year, we have, again, 10 principal residents, and they recently, in February, completed a residency in one school where they began in the fall and transitioned to a new residency in a different school for the spring. This does not show a full history of our Aspiring Principals program, which has been operated with new leaders, but looks back from 2011 to today. On the left side, you can see there were 78 staff members who served as principal residents and went through that year-long development program. And then below that 78, you can see some other data points. I will highlight that 32 of those individuals became principals and continue to serve as principals in the district today. and another 19 currently serve as assistant principals in the district, so more than 50 of our principals and assistant principals came through our Aspiring Principals program. On the right side, I'm sharing one data point, admittedly just one, about that relates to student performance in schools that are currently led by principals who came through the Aspiring Principals program. So first, 20% of all of our schools are led by someone who came through that program. We looked at schools that last year experienced 5% or higher growth in either English language arts or math, and the 24% of those principals were principals who came through the Aspiring Principals program. Then we looked at schools that experienced 5% or more growth in both of those areas, both subject areas, and 33% of those schools are led by principals who came through the Aspiring Principals program. And then finally, we looked at schools that had double-digit student growth in both ELA and math, and that's really tremendous growth, and therefore that's a small number of schools, but 3 of the 4 schools that experienced that growth last year are led by principals who were trained through our partnership with New Leaders. So I mentioned a moment ago that I wanted to come back to the 2 of 10 becoming principals after the 2017-2018 school year. That was also that was the same number that became principals immediately following the completion of the principal residency from the year before that. So 2 years in a row, much different from our experience earlier on in our Aspiring Principals program. Only 20% of the candidates were appointed into principal roles in the year directly following their residency, and therefore we made some adjustments to the program in partnership with New Leaders, and I highlighted some of those here. The first one is about strategic site selection. We had been unable for some time to centrally fund the cost of the principal residence, and therefore where principal residents were completing their year of development was in part based on which schools had funding in their school-based budget. And a variety of individuals and New Leaders shared with us that they felt like that was a barrier to preparing as best they and we can people to step into the principal role. So last year we identified a mix of Title I and Title II funds to allow us to centrally fund the cost of the residence so that we could then identify the schools based on the quality of the mentor principal in that school and the quality of the sort of learning environment that the school could provide. The next adjustment that we made is as I mentioned earlier, our residents this year are getting 2 opportunities to work with 2 different leaders over the course of the year in residency. And then the third item is we specifically focused on schools this year that serve secondary grades. So a couple of those are high schools. Others are schools that serve middle grades, whether it's because they're a middle school or a K-8 school. And we did this because we anticipate over the next several years needing more strong secondary principals as vacancies arise, and we wanted to make sure that this program was preparing folks for that. The last 3 items on here are smaller adjustments that we've made. I will just highlight here the ILED engagement. We wanted to make sure that during the residency year, principal residents were getting more opportunities to directly meet and interact with ILEDs, given that those principal supervisors have an important role in selecting principals each year. When we think about screening and placement, we've shared with you before that we updated our assessment center, which is a day-long interview process that candidates for principals go through. We updated that last year, and we also updated it and provided it for the first time in a few years for assistant principal candidates last year. We are continuing that, and when we think about strategic placement, we've worked this year with individuals who passed through the assessment center to gather a little more sort of soft skill information about them and give them an opportunity to create profiles. So everyone involved in this selection process leading up to an appointment has more opportunity to get to know people in their full selves. This is just a picture of an example of what people are creating. This, of course, is not a principal candidate. This is Roxanne Ford, the Director of Principal Leadership Development. So she graciously created one of her own to share here as a sample. So next, principal and assistant principal induction and mentoring has been a focus under Roxanne's leadership since that role was created now a year and a half ago. So this year, all of our first-time principals from traditional schools are engaged in monthly activities, monthly principal induction activities as a group, and they are supported with a coach through BKL, which has continued for a few years to support new principals. We also have an assistant principal induction for the first time this year. This was really significant because last year you may remember that we had 40 people who were first-time assistant principals. So we really, for the first time in a while, had a large new cohort of people stepping into that role, which is really important for our leadership development over time. And we wanted to make sure that those assistant principals could get off to the best start in that role. So 30 of them who are mostly in traditional schools and a couple from charters, have been participating in that assistant principal induction program. So the reason that Roxanne is not sharing this presentation with you and that Ashley Stewart, our Executive Director of Talent and Organizational Development, is not here is that they are in Texas today because they, as a group of two, applied for a national leadership design fellowship that is led by the KIPP Foundation. And this is the second of a series of 3 meetings where they come together with other leadership development practitioners from districts and some charters from across the country. So we're excited about what they will be able to bring back to further inform how we continue, adjust, improve, and expand our activities around school leaders. Finally, we also have been working over the last year with the Joint Governing Panel, which is for the Administrators Union, which is a group of administrators who work with the district around principal pathways. So we have a transformational principal pathway that is designed to identify our strongest serving principals and give them opportunities also to bring their skills to support other principals or support district-wide activities. We had 3 cohorts. We have had 3 cohorts, and then this year, after a design process where we thought anew about how to identify those transformational principles and use them, we launched applications for a 4th cohort and now a 5th cohort. So we will, this spring, be announcing 2 new cohorts of transformational principals. And you can see that across those 2 applications, we had 15 of our current principals eligible for and apply for the transformational pathway. This shows what it looks like for transformational principals in our vision. So on the left side, we have a role here to make sure that our transformational principals have additional development opportunities as they step into that role. 2 examples of that are last spring, transformational principals were given the first opportunities to lead principal professional learning communities, and they went through a series of development sessions to prepare for that leadership role. And then this spring, transformational principals had existing transformational principals had an opportunity to indicate interest in serving as mentors to future new principals, and they'll be receiving some development about preparing for that next year. And then on the right side, you just see some examples of things that transformational principals can say they more broadly would like to offer. So when someone now applies for a new cohort, at that time they identify what activities they propose to do once they're in that role. And so other examples beyond what I said there are to learning site activities would be allowing others to come and see how things are working in their school that could be shared. And then policy implementation activities would be helping district-wide support future policy development. So I think Sarah, you'll take up next to talk about teachers.
Talk about teachers. So as we shared in our September 2018 update, Maryland is an import state, meaning that a state that prepares only about half of the teachers that we need annually. So we really do rely on a variety of teacher pipelines to fill our vacancies. As you can see, we've historically hired about 500 teachers over the last 3 years, and of the 555 hired this year, over half, or 60%, were conditionally or traditionally certified. Less than half, or about 40%, were alternatively certified, sourced through one of our 3 alternative partners, Baltimore City Teaching Residency, Teach for America, or Urban Teachers. The projections on the bottom left and right are the number of teachers that we would need to hire in 1920 and 2021 respectively. If we had sort of similar years to this year in terms of position landscape and attrition and filled all of our vacancies. Given that we're working on a number of initiatives to retain more of our better teachers, the slightly reduced number on the right accounts for what we anticipate to be greater retention in the 2021 school year. All right, so this year we cut the number of schools that opened with more than one vacancy, teacher vacancy, by half, from 42 to 21. And of the 21 schools that opened with more than one vacancy, 9 were traditional schools, and about 13 of those were charter schools. So given our district focus on equity, we wanted to look at these schools against the Community Conditions Index map just to see if we could glean any preliminary findings. And though it is just one data point, and though we need to continue to track this moving forward, it is certainly positive that the number of schools with more than one vacancy in the lowest investment area has decreased from 1718 to 1819. All right. So our teacher interns are an important source of new teachers to city schools. So we certainly value their experiences and seek to provide an expedited hiring process as a way to keep them in city schools. So on the left, you can see the colleges and universities that we partner with for our teacher interns. And while we're still awaiting a couple of lists from university partners for the spring interns, we will have over 100 teacher interns interning with us this school year. On the right, you will see the expedited hiring process and earlier hiring timeline for interns whom our school leaders have recommended for hiring. So because our teacher interns spend a considerable amount of time in our schools, essentially a protracted interview process, we offer early contracts when an intern expresses interest in teaching with city schools, and a school leader and supervising teacher indicate that they would like to, that the intern would be a great fit with city schools. All right. So we also rely on our alt-route programs for teachers in our high-needs content areas, such as math, special ed, and ESOL. We do expect that each of our pipeline programs, for example, will bring in or place about a quarter of their teachers in special ed. These figures represent the minimum that each program wants to bring in, so it is certainly possible that the numbers will be larger in the aggregate. And then we wanted to share some a high-level overview of the teacher selection process with you. So from the time that a candidate applies to city schools to the time of hire. So as you can see, the process begins after the candidate applies with an eligibility screen. a phone interview with one of our teacher ambassadors, and that is a new step in the process this year, and a requirement to complete the EPI, which is an assessment that is used to predict teachers' performance in the classroom, before moving to the candidate pool that is then viewable to our school leaders. So once in that pool, school leaders can assess the pool and reach out to candidates that they're interested in moving through their school-based selection process to determine fit with the school and the school community. Once the school makes a selection, they then recommend their hire to the Human Capital Office, who then works to complete the onboarding and hiring process for that particular candidate. I'm now going to turn it over to Diane, who's going to walk us through how our teachers and principals support in the recruitment efforts.
So as Sarah mentioned, a new step in our process this year is a phone interview with teacher ambassadors. We hired 22 teacher ambassadors this year, and they're all veteran teachers in the district who have shown strong performance, and they're across content areas. So eligible applicants will be invited to sign up for a phone interview with a teacher ambassador that will take place within 2 weeks of them being deemed eligible. The teacher ambassadors will interview them, and again, these are teachers who are the example of what we want to expose our candidates to. So these are all teachers who have been with city schools for at least 5 years, many of them for 10 plus years. They have a variety of leadership experiences in their schools, and they just represent the commitment that we really want candidates to demonstrate. So this is the first year that we are implementing this step in the process, and also they are screening candidates by content area. So when a candidate applies for an elementary position, for example, they will have an interview with an elementary teacher. As you can see, the teacher ambassador cohort is a diverse cohort. So we have teachers who represent a variety of pathways into teaching, who also are teaching in a variety of schools. They have different experience levels, and they have demonstrated leadership across a variety of areas in their schools. And they also are diverse in terms of their racial and ethnic identity. Keisha Christian is one example of one of our teacher ambassadors. She currently teaches at Carver. So Keisha is a Baltimore native. She graduated from Dunbar High School in 1996 and then graduated from the University of Maryland, Baltimore in 2000 with a degree in medical and research technology. She then became a conditional teacher in Prince George's County and became certified within 2 years in 2005, and then in 2007 she joined City Schools. So she's been with City Schools for 11 years. And in that time, she has taught in a number of schools. She's been at Carver for the past 4 years, and Keisha has also held a variety of leadership roles in all of the schools where she's taught. The second teacher ambassador who I will highlight is Patience Bell. So Patience also joined City Schools in 2007, and she's also a Baltimore native. She joined Teach for America upon graduating from Gettysburg College in 2007. Like Keisha, she's also held a variety of leadership positions while during her time in the district. But unlike Keisha, she's been at one school for 11 years, which is North Bend Elementary. And we're really excited about having these teacher ambassadors, as well as the 20 others, to interview our teacher candidates. We also value principal participation in our process, and principals are really key and really invested in helping us to build a diverse, high-quality pool of candidates who are right for city schools. So this list represents the principals who are participating in recruitment events this year. Many of them have participated in recruitment events in the past. What you'll notice is, like our teacher ambassadors, they also represent a variety of schools and types of schools. In addition to school leaders participating, we also have different departments participating as well. ESOL participates. Maria mentioned the expansion of recruitment, and that was in partnership with us, as well as teaching and learning, early learning, special education, and there are other departments that participate in our recruitment endeavors as well. The primary activities that we've leveraged principal support in for recruitment are the top two: cultivating and interviewing candidates, as well as participating in external recruitment events. In an effort to broaden our reach this year, for the first time, we're asking participating school leaders to reach out to their alma maters to recruit from their alma maters. We've also thought about broadening this strategy beyond school leaders to district office, for example. Our initial thoughts, we also thought about leveraging principals to interview substitute candidates, since that's also an area of high investment for principals. But we want to be careful on how we're leveraging their time, and we think we actually have this area covered, but it was something that we considered. And I just wanted to provide two examples of quotes from two school leaders who participate in recruitment events. So first, Principal Mosley, and I just want to point out how he frames recruitment in terms of equity, being on the front lines to recruit the best for all of our students. And then the second principal, Principal Wonder, what's interesting is that Principal Wonder frequently does not have a lot of vacancies in his school, but he still likes to participate in recruitment events. And he calls out the importance of recruiting for the district, even though his school does not have a high number of vacancies annually. And he also talks about how recruitment energizes him and centers him, and he's able to bring that back to his school community.
Okay, so we've talked about how teachers and school leaders support in our recruitment efforts. Here we step back a bit to take a higher look at our recruitment efforts more broadly. So in preparation for the 1920 school year, we're scheduled to attend over 30 recruitment events to build a large, diverse pool of teachers. So in last year's recruitment season, new events were primarily added in collaboration with the ESOL department to recruit ESOL teachers. The 7+ new events this year are a combination of new HBCUs, such as Florida A&M, Virginia State, and Delaware State, as examples, and other universities that are in relatively close proximity to Maryland that have reached out to us. And so we're excited to see what these additions will contribute to the pool. We plan to recruit from 8 HBCUs this year with a goal to increase that by 2 next year, or to recruit from about 10% of the HBCUs next year. And then finally, our recruitment efforts span 9 different states, and we're seeking to recruit from all Maryland colleges and universities this year. So we are focusing on the following strategies to make our recruitment efforts more expansive and strategic. So first, seeking to create new staff recruitment materials focused on telling the stories of our staff, school, and city. So we've been working with the communications department to develop recruitment and marketing materials that tell a compelling story of Baltimore to attract teacher, school leader, and district office candidates to city schools. Additionally, we're in the preliminary stages of creating profiles for some of our Title I schools as a way to provide more information about our schools and highlight the uniqueness of the schools to candidates. Additionally, we'd like to leverage the human capital partners and other staff to deepen relationships with existing university partners, develop new ones, and provide strategic recruitment capacity for some of our harder to fill positions, such as CTE. And CTE, as one example, requires such specific targeted recruitment efforts by virtue of all of the different vocational areas. And so we're excited to dedicate capacity outside of the recruitment team itself to help develop that plan. An additional strategy is to create strategic partnerships with local colleges and universities to certify our conditional teachers. So we really have heard time and time again, most recently through our work with the Black Teacher Recruitment and Retention Working Group, that regarding the importance of helping to streamline the pathway to certification for our conditionally certified teachers. So this will better enable us to attract math and science majors, as we will be able to provide them with a clear pathway to certification. And then finally, we're seeking to track where our strongest candidates are coming from to more strategically focus our efforts in the future. So we're gathering a number of data points through our newer applicant tracking system, and we'll have access to reports that we haven't had access to to before, which will enable us to track folks more efficiently and ultimately focus our efforts more strategically. And
Can we have a question?
This is a very quick question. Thank you, Madam Chair. When you say tracking our strongest candidates, tracking where the strongest candidates are coming from, what does that mean?
yeah, so
What qualifications are you looking for when you say tracking the strongest candidates?
yeah, so that's a good question. So I can start with a high-level overview. So as Diane said, for the first time ever, we are having teacher ambassadors conduct a phone screen with every single candidate, and they will be scoring that candidate along a rubric. All right. Additionally, we are requiring for the first time that all applicants take the EPI assessment, which is an assessment that predicts teachers' performance in the classroom. So those qualifications together will determine sort of how our teachers, like the qualifications of the applicants.
Commissioner, I would add that what also is particularly new here is we haven't in the past looked at different traditional sources of teacher candidates in terms of how their teachers end up performing, whether it's based on teacher evaluation data or student performance data. So we have at least looked at that with respect to teacher evaluation data for alternative programs and regularly share that with the board. But we have not looked in the past to say, if Diane's team is going to Florida A&M for the first time, we were recently in Wisconsin, to see of teachers who actually come to the district from those places, how do they ultimately perform in the classroom?
All right. And our final slide. So as you may recall, in June 2018, 25 international teachers whose H-1B visas expired were required to leave the country while we worked to secure extensions. So of these 25 teachers, over half of them teach in special ed, and the others teach in a variety of high-needs content areas. In addition to filling critical roles, these teachers they've worked with us for numbers of years, and we're very important to their schools and school communities. So we're pleased that as of January 25th, 24 of the 25 had been approved and have returned to the U.S. Where possible, and in the majority of cases, teachers were placed back at their original school assignments. And as you can see, we are still awaiting resolution for one final teacher. So we're hoping to have it resolved soon.
Although we do not currently recruit internationally, we figured we'd put a really specific good news item here at the end, knowing that there was a lot of concern from the district and certainly on the side of the teachers themselves last year when they learned that they were experiencing difficulties with federal agencies around their immigration status, and we're excited that almost all of them are now back in the classroom.
It's a very full report also, and wonderful, very exciting. Thank you. Any more questions? You do? Yes. Commissioner McFadden has
Thank you. Teacher recruitment is a national issue. We're facing a national issue of recruiting and retaining teachers. So it's nice to hear about the strategies that the district is employing to ensure that we get high quality teachers. I'm concerned about the teachers that we are attracting from within our city, particularly. I'm interested in hearing about the para to teacher development. How are we developing our para educators to transition from being a para educator into a full-time classroom teacher? I'm definitely interested in hearing more about that. I'm also interested in hearing about how are we leveraging Baltimore City Community College and how we have the Mayor Scholars Program. Are we looking for ways to incentivize teaching to our high school graduates that are coming from out of city schools that are going into Baltimore City Community College? Do we see if they would like to go into teaching and continue at a four-year college to, be certified to come into our schools? I'm interested in hearing about that. If that is something that we're doing, I think that we should, as a district, look into that. What ways can we incentivize? Something similar. Like in my brain, just throwing out an idea. But if I think programs like Teach for America, if you do a certain amount of years committed, then there's some sort of reimbursement or something like that. I don't know how it works, but I know that is similar. And if we could do something like that for our residents and our city folks, I think that would be interesting. So you don't have to answer it now because I know we're tight with time, but that was just something that I was thinking about as you all were talking. Also, this is something that I do want to know, 2 questions. Can you define a transformational principal? What is the definition of the transformational principal, and what are some of their qualifications? How do we select them? I know you talked about that a little, but how do we select the transformational principals? What are some of their qualifications?
Sure, I'll quickly say one thing about your first comment about the parent-to-teacher program, knowing that board members heard from Tracy Folks, who works with the BTU a couple of board meetings ago during the BTU comments, and she was talking about efforts to restart a parent-to-teacher program. Dr. Santelices and I met with Tracy and Dr. Irma Johnson from Coppin State University just last week, and our plans at this point moving forward are to select cohorts of 15 paraeducators per year to restart that program, and I think it's really been informed by some past experiences where there was a commitment in the past financially, but one that didn't yield a lot of paraeducators who actually became teachers. So I would say Ms. Folks has been very thoughtful about how to plan for restarting that, and we can certainly share more as that gets off the ground. Transformational, I wish I had the exact language with me. I don't, because for transformational principals, but ultimately they are principals who have performed at high levels over a number of years in city schools, leading a school, and want to both continue that high level of performance and share their expertise in one way or another with other principals, especially newer principals. There are minimum criteria to apply to be a transformational principal, and those include being at least effective in the principal evaluation system for the last 3 years. If you meet the minimum criteria, you can then apply, and a group of administrators serve on the committee that reviews the applications. I will say there are multiple domains in the application. The first domain is about student growth and student performance over the last several years. So principals are asked to tell their story about how they, over the course of at least 3 years in the same school, have improved student learning opportunities. And then there are other domains where they get to talk about the things that sort of add up to that, like how their vision and their oversight of curriculum and of teaching and learning. So it's a sort of well-rounded view, knowing that past evaluation data are part of the minimum criteria, and movement in terms of student learning over a number of years is is sort of a qualifying domain once you submit an application.
We hear a lot about retaining, recruitment for teachers and principals. And I would just like to hear moving forward more about how we are supporting principals, particularly to retain them, especially strong principals in our most needed areas. Quick question, do we offer tuition reimbursement for our principals, for school leaders?
Yeah, there's a provision in the contract, in the collective bargaining agreement with the administrators union that provides tuition reimbursement for principals and other administrators. I will say it is there. I don't recall the exact negotiated amount, but there's like a union-wide cap, and we I think in recent years have never reached that cap. So principals have been able to take advantage of any tuition reimbursement they want. I will say being on the transformational pathway is about much more than just salary, but certainly salary is one thing that influences retention, and our transformational principles make a minimum of $148,000. So one piece of the strategy of that contract that we have with Pizzazza is to ensure that principals who meet that rough definition that I shared with you actually can make well more than what is typical of principals, and hopefully that supports their ongoing retention here.
I appreciate that, and this is it. You don't have to answer it now, but I'm curious to know how diverse actually the teacher ambassadors are. So I know that a lot of our content areas, we downsized central office staff, so a lot of those offices are small. So to kind of help with the recruitment of teachers in those content areas throughout the district, do we have a diverse pool of these teacher ambassadors that are kind of helping? I know you mentioned that, but I would just like to know more about particularly fine arts, because I know that I'm a fine arts person, and I know that there are several content areas within the area of fine arts, and so I'm just curious to know what the diversity of the teacher ambassadors look like. You don't have to answer it now.
And we'll
'cause I
look
know
forward to hearing that in the
you
future,
see.
because we're running out of
See,
time.
so I knew it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So we do have some procurement items.
We also have social and emotional.
That's in procurement.
That's in procurement.
That's a part of procurement.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Vogel, Interim Director of Procurement. There are 3 items on the agenda this afternoon. Would you like me to briefly summarize each, or would you like to go right into the questions you might have?
Excuse me, would you mind if we change the order just a tad bit of the procurement items to start with this one? that's on-
Absolutely.
on the-
Yes, because that.
on the board.
yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Could we start with the, you go ahead. What's it
Are you
called?
okay if I frame just a little bit before I
Yes,
turn
thank
it
you.
over to
Thank you. I'll turn it
Casey?
over to you. Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're bringing back the Leader in Me, because on January 22nd at a board meeting, the academic office brought forth potential SEL partners for board approval. And based on the discussion that night, there's a few things that resonated with me. One, that I really think that because this has happened a couple of years in a row where the PQS process went to the board and there were a lot of questions, I would just want to make sure that we go through the PQS process and make sure we are explaining what this is, why it's important, why do we do this. I feel like we also have to talk about the ESSA requirements within that PQS process and our partnership with OAA. And specifically for the Leader in Me, I want to give a little bit more information around the content around this program and some of the research behind this program. And then with that, I would like to turn it over to my special assistant, Casey Mangle.
Good afternoon, early evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity to bring this back before the Teaching and Learning Committee, and then hopefully again before the board at the following board meeting. So just want to take a moment, as Chief Connolly said, to highlight the PQS process. I have Joe here at the table as well. So Joe, if anything you want to add any detail, by all means, please feel free to do so. As this process, by and large, comes out of the procurement office. So we launched a social emotional learning pre-qualified services solicitation back in September and engaged interested parties in October, providing clarification around that process. The PQS was really designed for us as part of our blueprint work to begin that deeper solicitation of partnerships with both local and national vendors, which will allow us as a district to build a comprehensive catalog so that schools know who has been well vetted, board approved, and really aligns with our work in student wholeness and social emotional learning in particular. Through this process, those who apply are required to meet certain minimum, I would say, experience and documentation type qualifications as set out by our procurement office. So maybe meeting X number of years of qualified experience. ensuring that they've provided all completed financial documents, disclosures, etc., as a part of that process. Those who then sort of, I will say, pass muster with regard to those minimum qualifications as established by our procurement office, then come through to a review committee by which we look at leveraging a procurement rubric across the alignment of the particular program with our established SEL scope of work, the qualifications and capacity as articulated by the vendor's ability to show its evidence of effectiveness, and then the vendor's ability to usher forth programmatic materials so that we can get a real depth of understanding of the program, and then how they would go about evaluating the effectiveness of that work. So in total, that is sort of the complement of things that the PQS process asks us to review for each vendor who submits into that process. As you see here, one of the key pieces, and Teresa, by all means, feel free to chime in with regard to ESSA. One of the key pieces that we worked in partnership with our Achievement and Accountability Office across multiple departments, and of course with procurement, was to begin at the very least adding language to our PQS process that asked those submitting to be able to provide evidence of effectiveness that showed perhaps where they would align with ESSA levels of effectiveness. So within the PQS itself, vendors are asked to provide their research base, essentially, for the quality of their program, what their programs are based on, and how research has shown positive effects for those who are participating.
The only thing I'd like to add to that is that this ESSA evidence piece is really a consideration if the intended funding source would be a federal grant funding source. So if this is a program that would be expected to be funded with general funds, it wouldn't be a requirement that we would actually have to look at their ESSA evidence, so to speak.
For this particular PQS, a partnership between the Chief of Schools Office, so we had instructional leadership executive directors staffed on our review committee, as well as those from our related services office, myself, and our several members of our social emotional learning team out of the student wholeness office. And so we really led the process for review across these vendors. 27 submissions were received to 2 scope components. All that means is that we were asking folks to either apply to provide a curriculum or to provide something more programmatic, whether that was a direct program that students would engage in. A good example is a Project Numa, which you all approved at the board meeting, right? That's a direct program to students. Or a professional development complement of services for staff. Another good example would be Good Karma. They came through that as well, very much focused on our staff and their own adult SEL. Of those 27, we ushered forth 10 vendors. One vendor was not approved, as you know, through this process by the board, and that was Franklin Covey's Leader in Me. Before talking a little more specifically about Leader in Me and the board vote on the 22nd, I do, and again, Teresa, by all means, please step in, but just wanted to make sure that we were all clear. So for ESSA, when we look at that as part of our PQS review, the PQS review committee is not determining the level of ESSA for these particular vendors who come through. However, all vendors that come through in partnership with OAA are reviewed through OAA's ESSA Evidence of Effectiveness process, where all vendors are asked to submit their evidence to Teresa's research team, and they do a very thorough vetting in alignment with our understanding of the qualifications across each of the levels of effectiveness. Each of those vendors that were brought up to the board had either gone through that process previously or were in the process of doing so. All of our vendors have met the ESSA levels of effectiveness from a level 1. For example, Hazelden and Betty Ford, their BAR program came through as a level 1, really strong evidence of effectiveness, to a level 4, demonstrating rationale. So again, Project Numa is a great example of that, right? They're fairly novice in their research work, but they were able to demonstrate that level. So to be clear across those, strong evidence really means that an organization has engaged in a randomized control trial showing statistical significance and a favorable effect for their program. Right? This is a large enough sample size to be able to get a statistical significance to begin with. It's a very difficult to do in the field of education, as we know, and so there are few that meet this level of effectiveness. Many of them can be found, say, in the What Works Clearinghouse or on the ESSA site that's been listed above. Level 2 is moderate effectiveness. This is actually where the Leader in Me program and complement of curriculum and professional learning comes into play. They've conducted several quasi-experimental designs, also showing a positive statistical significance on educational outcomes for students. Level 3 is a promising evidence, where a correlational study has been conducted, allowing for statistical controls. Right? So again, we want to make sure that we're seeing a statistical significance and favorable effect on student outcomes in a promising level as well. A level 4 is demonstrating rationale. So these folks had to submit a well-designed logic model which was informed by research and has either an evaluation currently in process or one that is planned as part of the intervention. So just wanted to make sure that we were clear across the different levels coming through. Levels 1 and levels 2 are not easy to achieve. Not that level 3 is either, but the increasing level of difficulty of obtaining the type of statistically significant favorable effects across program, especially at a certain level in terms of either a multi-site or having a large enough sample, is hard to achieve in our line of work, unfortunately. So on January 22nd, as has been stated, we brought the SEL PQS vendors before the board. All of them had gone, either were previously reviewed for ESSA levels or were in the process of being done. All were approved except for Franklin Covey's Leader in Me. So just to reiterate. Today we're sitting before you all, and hopefully we'll be sitting before the board next week to request reconsideration in the vote regarding Leader in Me. Like all the other PQS submissions, Leader in Me was thoroughly vetted through a very rigorous process, which not only met the requirements of our procurement office, but meets high levels of effectiveness when we look at ESSA, knowing that we can therefore spend our title funding to support our schools in accessing this resource. We did have a cross-functional team of folks reviewing, ensuring that we were bringing a lens from practitioners in the field, as well as those who are supporting principals and our intensive learning sites to bear as we reviewed the scope that was put before us from this particular partner. In addition, Leader in Me is already a component of SEL across 3 of our school sites: City Springs, Garrett Heights, and Johnston Square. We have talked with each of these principals, and they all submitted letters of recommendation in support of this partner coming aboard city schools. They do hold an ESSA Level 2, and they're also ranked as one of Castle's top select SEL select programs by our partners at Castle. As you know, Castle is the partner that has brought to us their framework for social emotional learning. And so this program ties directly not only with their core components for SEL, but high ratings for them in terms of how this program engages staff, students, and the community and families that surround schools.
We would love to take any questions at this time, but ultimately, we're really seeking permission to bring this back to a full board for possible reconsideration if you see fit.
Do any of my fellow commissioners have any reasons not to bring this back to the full board?
I don't have any, and I would just say that when it was presented to this committee previously, we approved it to go forward for procurement. So I mean, personally, I have no problem with us making that recommendation again.
I don't have any problems with that.
Commissioner McFadden?
When I look at the Missouri schools and the Florida schools, the analysis of the program in those areas, I'm cautioned to see how those particular areas are relative to Baltimore City schools and the effectiveness of the program there. What would the effectiveness look like here in Baltimore City, which is unique in a sense to Florida or Missouri? Not that I have an issue with it going before the full board, but that's just, Chief Conley just asked and open. I know we got to move on.
Well, so that might be helpful when it comes to the full board. You might want to keep that comment in mind and perhaps address it at that.
Absolutely, and if I could just quickly respond to that, I think Casey, what was the first one you talked about? Was it BAR? I don't know the actual official name of BAR.
Hazelton Betty Ford.
Hazelton Betty Ford BAR. I think that's a great question that you're asking, because I remember meeting with them, and I actually had the same question for them. I said that you're putting all this research in front of me, and it's from these different places across the country, but I know, just like here, that program is in city schools right now. Why is that data not being presented? And it was early on in being in a city school. They just didn't have the time yet to say, we've been here for multiple years and we now have collected this data to look for effectiveness. And so I've visited Johnson Square. It is the first year in Johnson Square as well, but I would say the wholeness specialist, when he walked with me, and the principal, when he walked with me as well, the wholeness specialist actually brought it from a prior school, and they talked about how Leader and Me made the SEL framework, those competencies, actually tangible for teachers and students. So I just wanted to say that in the sense of, I still think it's fairly new in Baltimore City, so we may not have the data yet, but we also have BAR, which is in the same situation, and they, I believe, are ESSA one. I believe it was Meta 1. So I think it's a great question, but it is something we do need to push our partners to make sure that we're looking at the research and evidence of effectiveness here in Baltimore, but there are going to be situations where it's just new. It's young.
And I would like to just add to that. I think this whole question around where we are on the spectrum of taking a look at evidence of effectiveness in a different way in city schools is a place where we're still relatively in the early stages of, now that we have these ESSA evidence-based requirements, particularly around these federally funded programs. And so part of what we're starting to tee up is, what does that work look like over multiple years? So if you think about it, this is sort of a first step to say, let's use those programs that have already passed this initial hurdle, if you will. But then as we start to implement them, we need to figure out what is the impact within our district. So I do anticipate that you'll start to see more of that embedded within the procurement items that come forward, so that we have a more holistic picture, because you're absolutely right. Just because something has passed the muster in a different setting and meets a certain standard, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to be successful when there are different characteristics of students, districts, all those things that can have an impact around the implementation and the quality of the program. So that is a part of our looking out plan for how do we actually measure effectiveness across the board.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we will be discussing this again in front of the board. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Do we any questions on the remaining two items? No. I don't think.
The management center that is coming out of human capital's, okay.
Can I just say, I'm sorry, I have to leave, going down to the School of Arts, so I have to get parking.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So did we have any questions submitted to the board office for this meeting? Is there anyone in the room who has a question for us? Seeing none, we will adjourn. Thank you all very much for your patience and warmth.